I still remember the exact sound the wheels made on the terminal floor. That soft click-click-click of a heavy trunk being pulled across polished stone. Funny, the things your brain holds onto. Everyone else remembers the shouting. I remember the wheels. Let me back up. My name is Thomas Ver, and for 11 years I served in the ceremonial guard of the Kingdom of Aldermere, a small country tucked between the mountains and the gray northern sea, the kind of place tourists visit for one long weekend and then can't stop talking about for years. We had a palace. We had a young king, Alaric, barely 26 when his mother died, and we had traditions older than the stone the palace was built on. I want to tell you about the morning at Corvin International Airport. But to understand what happened there, you have to understand what happened 3 weeks before, in a storage room nobody was supposed to open. I was one of 4 guards assigned to the old wing after the late Queen Mother, Queen Sabine, passed. She died in the winter quietly in her sleep at the age of 81. The whole country mourned her. She wasn't just loved. She was trusted, and those are different things. People trust you when they've watched you keep a promise for 60 years. The old wing was being catalogued. That's the polite word for it. When someone royal dies, teams of people go through everything they owned, item by item, and write it all down in ledgers. Who gets what? What goes to the state? What goes to museums? It's slow, dusty, boring work, and my job was just to stand at the door and make sure nobody wandered in who shouldn't. That's how I met Elna. Elna Rask was the senior archivist, a woman maybe 60 years old with reading glasses she kept losing on top of her own head. She talked to herself constantly. She talked to the objects too. "There you are," she'd murmur to a hairbrush. "And where have you been hiding?" to a stack of letters. I liked her immediately. On the 9th day, something changed. I noticed it because Elna went quiet. That was the strange part. The talking stopped. I looked in through the doorway and she was standing at a low cabinet, one hand pressed flat against her chest like she was checking her own heartbeat. In her other hand was a small wooden box, the kind you'd keep jewelry in, dark and worn smooth at the corners from being handled. "Everything all right?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said very softly, "These aren't in the ledger." I didn't understand what that meant, not yet. She opened the box wider so I could see. Inside were pieces I recognized. Even I recognized them, and I'm no expert. The Sabine pieces. A brooch shaped like a frost flower, all white stones and silver. A ring with a stone the color of deep water. A thin circlet, not a full crown, but something close. These weren't ordinary jewels. These were the heirlooms every Aldermere child sees in school books. The ones the late Queen wore in her official portrait. The one that hangs in every government building in the country. "They should be here," I said. "This is her wing." "No," Elna shook her head slowly. "They should be here, but they were signed out 4 months ago. There's a record, I saw it myself last week, a transfer order moving them into private safekeeping." She looked up at me and her face had gone the color of old paper. "Signed by the Dowager." The Dowager, that was Queen Sabine's daughter-in-law, Margaret, the late king's widow, which made her the young King Alaric's mother. A tall, elegant woman who wore gray almost exclusively and had a way of looking at you that made you feel measured and filed away. "So they were moved," I said. "That's allowed, isn't it? She's family." "They were moved," Elna agreed. "And then, according to every record I can find, they left the country 3 days ago." She closed the box gently like it might wake up. "But they're here, Thomas, in my hands right now." I remember the cold that went down my spine. Because there's only one way an object can be in 2 places. Somebody lied on paper, and somebody left something real behind, maybe by accident, maybe not. Elna set the box down and pulled out her ledger. Her hands were shaking a little. "I need you to witness this," she said. "I need someone to see that I found these here today in this room, not somewhere else. Here." I signed my name under hers. I didn't know I was signing myself into the middle of the worst month of my life. Word travels strangely in a palace. It doesn't move in straight lines. It seeps like water finding cracks. By that evening, the head of household knew. By the next morning, the king's private secretary knew. And 2 days after that, I was summoned to a small office I'd never been inside, where a man named Deputy Chamberlain Voss sat behind a desk and asked me to describe exactly what I'd seen. I told him the truth. There didn't seem to be any other option. Voss listened, nodded, wrote nothing down. That bothered me. When people don't write things down, it usually means they've already decided what the record is going to say. You understand, he said carefully, that Queen Sabine's estate is a delicate matter, that there are private arrangements the public need not be troubled with. Grief makes people careless with paperwork. That's all this is. Carelessness. The archivist says the same jewels are recorded as leaving the country, I said, and they're in a box in the old wing. The archivist, Voss said, is mistaken. I saw them myself. He smiled at me the way you'd smile at a dog that had learned a trick. Then you're mistaken too. I left that office knowing something was wrong all the way down. I'd stood guard for 11 years. I'd escorted foreign presidents. I'd stood so still during a 4-hour state funeral that a bird landed on my shoulder and I never twitched. Discipline was the whole of my life. And discipline was telling me, in a quiet voice I couldn't ignore, that a man had just asked me to unremember the truth. I didn't sleep well after that. Here's the thing about the heirlooms that the school books don't tell you. Queen Sabine had made a promise publicly decades ago. She'd stood on the palace balcony after the Great Flood, the one that drowned half the lower city when she was still a young queen, and she'd said the crown jewels of Aldermere belonged to the people, not to any one family. She said that if the country ever suffered like that again, the jewels would be sold, every last stone, and the money would go to the people who needed it. She meant it. She wrote it into a trust. It became law. That was the thing about Sabine. She kept promises even when they cost her. So the heirlooms weren't just pretty. They were a pledge. They were the country's emergency fund, sitting in a box, waiting for the worst day. And if someone was quietly moving them out of the country under false paperwork, then someone was quietly breaking the one promise the whole nation had built its trust on. I didn't know why yet. I just knew that the woman whose signature was on the transfer order, the Dowager Margaret, was scheduled to fly out of Corvin International in 3 weeks' time. A private visit abroad, the announcement said. Health reasons. Elna found me in the courtyard the day she connected it all. She's not coming back, Elna said. No hello, just that. What? Margaret, the flight isn't a visit. I pulled the manifest. It's a one-way charter. And the estate transfers Tomas. She's been moving things for months. Not just the jewels, accounts, property deeds, anything that isn't nailed down. Elna's voice cracked. She's emptying the trust before anyone finishes counting. And once she's across the border, none of it can be touched. Different laws, different country. It'll be gone, all of it. The flood money, everything Sabine promised. I stood there in the cold courtyard and felt the whole shape of it land on me at once. Why hasn't anyone stopped her? I asked. Elna laughed, but there was no humor in it. Who would? Voss works for her. The Chamberlain's office answers to the household, and the household is loyal to whoever signs the checks. The king is 26 and drowning in advisors who all tell him the same thing, that questioning his own mother would tear the country apart. So nobody moves. Everybody waits. And in 3 weeks she walks onto a plane and it's over. The police need a complaint filed by the household to even open an inquiry into royal property, and the household won't file it. She took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. I've spent 40 years protecting the history of this family, Tomas, and I'm watching one person walk off with the piece of it that actually mattered, the promise, the thing that made people love her mother-in-law. She looked at me. You witnessed it. Your name is on my ledger next to mine. We're the only 2 people who can say, out loud, that the jewels were here after they were supposed to be gone. I understood then what she was really telling me. 2 people had proof, and in 3 weeks the proof wouldn't matter, because the thing it proved would be on the other side of a border where our word meant nothing. I want to be honest with you about something, because this is the part that still keeps me up. I almost did nothing. I'm not a hero. I want you to understand that before this story goes any further, I was a guard. I had a small apartment, a cat named Bishop, and a pension I was 11 years into earning. I had a sister with 2 kids who I helped support. If I made noise about the Dowager Queen and I was wrong, or even if I was right, my life as I knew it was over. No pension. No reference. Maybe worse. People who cross royals in small countries have a way of finding every door closed to them. So for about a week, I told myself Elna's numbers must be off. I told myself Voss was probably right, that grief made paperwork messy. I told myself it wasn't my job. I'd taken an oath to guard the palace, not to police the people inside it. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the portrait gallery on my day off, in plain clothes, and I stood in front of the official painting of Queen Sabine. She's wearing the heirlooms in it, the frost flower brooch, the circlet, and she's not smiling. She never smiled in portraits, said smiling made queens look nervous, but there's something in her eyes the painter caught, something steady and warm. There was a school group there that morning. Little kids, maybe 7 years old, in matching yellow caps. A teacher was telling them the flood story, the balcony, the promise. The Queen said the jewels belonged to everyone, the teacher said, so that if a terrible day ever came again, no one would be left with nothing. One little girl put up her hand and asked, "Are they still there, the jewels?" And the teacher said, "Yes, they're kept safe for all of us." I stood at the back of that gallery, and I felt something break loose in my chest. Because the teacher was wrong, and she didn't know she was wrong. And that little girl was going to grow up believing a promise that had already been quietly stolen, while everyone who could stop it decided it was easier to look away. I walked out of that gallery, and I knew I couldn't be one of the people who looked away. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost me, or that in 3 weeks I'd be standing in the middle of Corvin International Airport, in full ceremonial dress, blocking the path of the second most powerful woman in the kingdom, with a crowd of strangers filming every second. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I kept working. That was the strange part. I still put on my uniform every morning. I still stood my post. I still saluted the officers who walked past, some of whom I now suspected knew exactly what was happening and had decided it was above their pay grade to notice. You'd be amazed what a person can carry inside while their face stays perfectly still. Guarding teaches you that. Your body learns to be a wall while your mind runs in circles behind it. Elna and I met carefully after that. Not in the palace. We'd meet at a bakery near the river, the kind of place with steamed windows and a woman behind the counter who didn't care who you were as long as you bought a roll. We'd sit in the back and talk in low voices like 2 people planning a robbery, which I suppose, in a way, was the opposite of what we were doing. We were trying to stop one. I went to the king's office, Elna told me one morning. She looked exhausted. I requested a meeting, formal channels. Do you know what happened? Voss. Voss, she wrapped both hands around her tea. He intercepted the request, told me the king's schedule was full through the end of the season. Then he asked me very politely whether I'd thought about retirement, said 40 years was a long time, said the archive could arrange a lovely send-off. Her jaw tightened. It was a threat wearing a smile. So we can't reach the king. Not through the palace. Every road there is guarded by someone who works for her. I thought about that. I'd spent 11 years learning every corridor of that palace, every schedule, every habit. And I realized, sitting in that bakery, that I probably knew the king's movements better than his own private secretary did. Because guards watch. That's the whole job. We see everything and we're trained to react to none of it. He walks in the East Garden, I said slowly. Alone, most mornings before the household is up. His mother taught him the habit, apparently. Sabine used to walk there. He kept it after she died. Elna stared at me. You want to ambush the king in a garden. I want to talk to him, I said, somewhere Voss isn't standing between us. She was quiet for a long moment. If you're caught approaching the king off protocol, that's the end of you. Immediately. No inquiry. They'll say you're unstable, a guard who broke discipline. I know. They'll be right that you broke discipline. I know that too. She looked at me over her glasses, and something in her expression softened. Sabine would have liked you, she said. She had no patience for people who followed the rules straight off a cliff. I didn't get the chance to ambush anyone. 2 days later, the schedule changed. The Dowager Margaret's flight was moved up, not 3 weeks out, 6 days. Then, the following morning, 4 days. Someone was getting nervous. Someone had felt the ground shifting and decided to leave before it opened up. Elna called me at home, which she never did. It's Thursday, she said. The flight, they moved it to Thursday morning. Corvin International, the private aviation terminal 940, she'll clear customs in a diplomatic lane. No inspection. Once she's through that gate, Tomas, she's gone, wheels up and gone. Thursday was 3 days away. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and Bishop climbing into my lap, and I did the math over and over. 3 days. No way to reach the king in time through any honest channel. No police complaint possible. No court order, no injunction. No lawyer who'd touch it, nothing. Just me and Elna and a ledger with 2 signatures, and a woman about to fly a nation's broken promise across a border where it would dissolve into money and silence. And then I thought about the terminal. Here's something most people don't know. In Aldermere, the ceremonial guard doesn't only stand at the palace. On days when a member of the royal family travels officially, an honor detail is posted at the terminal. It's tradition. Old, stiff, mostly pointless tradition, a line of guards in dress uniform standing at attention while the royal walks past to the plane. A photo op. A show. And guess who was on the honor detail roster for Thursday morning? I hadn't requested it. I'd been assigned weeks ago before any of this, back when the flight was still 3 weeks out and I was just a guard with a schedule. Nobody had thought to pull me off it. Why would they? To them I was furniture, a uniform in a line. I was going to be there, 15 feet from her, in full dress, with legal standing to be exactly where I was standing. I called Elna back. I'm on the honor detail Thursday. The line went silent. Tomas, she said finally, you can't be thinking. Bring the box, I said. Bring the ledger, bring everything. And bring your phone, because the one thing they can't erase is a crowd that saw it happen. I need to slow down here and tell you what I was actually planning, because I've read some of the accounts people wrote afterward, and most of them made it sound braver and cleaner than it was. I wasn't planning to tackle anyone. I wasn't planning a speech. Guards don't speak. That's the entire point of us. In 11 years on duty in uniform, I had never once said a word that wasn't a command or a response. The silence is the discipline. The silence is the whole tradition. My plan, if you can call it that, was simple and terrifying. When the Dowager walked the honor line to her plane, I would break formation. I would step out of the line into her path, and I would refuse to move. And I would say, out loud in front of every camera in that terminal, one sentence: Your Majesty, the jewels are still in Aldermere, and I can prove it. That's it, that was the whole plan. Say the true thing out loud where it couldn't be unheard. Because the only weapon I had was witnesses. If I could get the truth into the open air, in front of enough eyes and phones, then even if they arrested me on the spot, even if they marched me away and ended my career right there, the sentence would be out. It would exist. It would be on 100 phones before she reached the gate, and a truth that 100 strangers have heard is very, very hard to make disappear. I didn't tell my sister. I didn't tell anyone but Elna. The night before, I ironed my dress uniform the way I always did, sharp creases, every button polished, and I sat with Bishop for a long time. I remember thinking, this might be the last time I wear this properly. After tomorrow, they'd probably take it from me. I wore it anyway. I wanted to be in it when I did this, not out of pride, because I wanted people to see that it wasn't a protester or a madman breaking the line. It was a guard, one of hers, one of the men who'd stood watch over that family and everything it promised. I wanted the uniform to say the thing my one sentence couldn't. Even we won't stand silent for this. Thursday came gray and cold, the way the important days in my country always seem to. Corvin International's private terminal isn't like the main hall. It's smaller, quieter, all glass and pale stone, with a long polished floor between the arrivals lounge and the doors to the tarmac. That morning it wasn't empty, though. Word of a royal departure always draws people. There were travelers who'd stopped to watch, a cluster of press behind a rope, invited to photograph the Dowager's dignified farewell. Airport staff. A few tourists with their phones already out, the way people always are now, ready to film anything that might be worth filming. I took my place in the honor line at 9:15. 6 of us, 3 to a side, forming a corridor of dress uniform from the lounge doors to the tarmac gate. I stood at the tarmac end, last man before the door, the last thing she'd pass before she was gone. I found Elna in the crowd. She was near the front of the watchers, gripping a canvas bag against her chest, and when our eyes met she gave the smallest nod. She had it, the box, the ledger, her phone. I have never been so frightened in my life, and I have stood through things that would frighten most people. My heart was going so hard I was sure the man beside me could hear it. I ran the sentence in my head over and over. Your Majesty, the jewels are still in Aldermere and I can prove it. 9 words. I'd said longer commands 1,000 times, but these 9 felt like they weighed as much as the palace itself. At 9:31, the lounge doors opened. She came through in gray, of course. A long gray coat, a gray silk scarf, and behind her Deputy Chamberlain Voss and 2 aides and a customs official who was there purely to wave her through the diplomatic lane without so much as opening a bag. She walked the way she always walked, slow, certain, chin level, like the floor itself had been laid specifically for her feet. The cameras began to flash. Someone said something. Somewhere a child laughed, out of place and bright. She started down the honor line. I want to tell you I was calm. I wasn't. Every instinct 11 years had drilled into me was screaming, stand still, you stand still. The discipline I'd built my whole life was fighting the thing I'd come to do. That's the part no account ever got right. It wasn't brave. It was a war inside my own body, and I honestly did not know until the last second which side was going to win. She passed the first guard, the second, the third. She was 3 steps away. I could see the fine gray wool of her coat. I could see the frost flower brooch pinned to it. And I felt the cold go through me all over again because I recognized it. She was wearing one of Sabine's pieces, out in the open, flying it out of the country pinned to her own chest, hidden in plain sight because who searches a queen? She reached me. Her eyes flicked to me for half a second the way you glance at a lamppost and moved on. To her I was furniture, a uniform in a line, the last piece of scenery between her and the door. And I stepped out of the line. I moved into her path and I stopped, boots together, and I did not move, and the whole terminal seemed to inhale at once. She halted. For one heartbeat she looked genuinely confused, as though a statue had shifted. Voss's head snapped up behind her. One of the aides started forward. And I said it, not shouting. Loud and clear and steady, the way you give a command so that every phone and every person in that echoing glass hall would catch it. Your Majesty, the heirlooms are still in Aldermere. I have seen them. I can prove it. And that brooch on your coat belongs to the people of this country. The silence after was the loudest thing I have ever heard. For a moment, nobody moved. I've thought about that silence 100 times since. It couldn't have lasted more than 2 or 3 seconds, but inside it I lived a whole life. I saw my pension evaporate. I saw my sister's face. I saw Bishop waiting by an empty door. I saw the little girl in the yellow cap asking, "Are they still there?" All of it in the space of one held breath. Then everything happened at once. Voss came alive. "Guard, stand down," he barked, pushing forward past the dowager. His face had gone a blotchy red. "This man is unwell, someone remove him, guards." But here's the thing about giving an order to guards. The other 5 men in that honor line had trained beside me for years. They knew me. They knew I didn't break formation. They knew that if Thomas Vere, the man who let a bird sit on his shoulder through an entire state funeral, had just stepped out of line and spoken, something was very, very wrong. And so when Voss shouted guards, not one of them moved toward me. They stood exactly still, the way we're trained, the way she'd counted on us being still. The Dowager Margaret had not moved either. She was staring at me, and for the first time I saw her mask slip just slightly, just at the corners. Not fear, something colder. Calculation. She was a woman who'd spent months planning this to the last detail, and she was recalculating in real time. "I don't know this man," she said to the cameras, not to me. Her voice was smooth as the floor. "He's clearly disturbed. Voss, get the airport security." And that might have worked. It really might have. One guard's word against a queen's. Disturbed. Unwell. They'd have walked me out, and by lunchtime the official story would have been a sad little tale about a soldier who cracked under stress, and she'd have been in the air, and the brooch and the promise with her. Except Elna stepped out of the crowd. She was 60 years old, in a cardigan, clutching a canvas bag, and she walked into that corridor of guards like she owned it. She'd worked in that palace for 40 years. She did not look disturbed. She looked like exactly what she was, the woman who knew where everything was. "My name is Elna Rask," she said, and her voice carried, thin but clear. "I am the senior archivist of the royal estate, and this man is telling the truth." She reached into the bag and lifted out the box. The worn wooden box, dark at the corners. She opened it and held it up, turning slowly so the cameras could see, and the pieces inside caught the gray light, the ring the color of deep water, the thin circlet, the empty velvet slot where a frost flower brooch should have been. "These are Queen Sabine's heirlooms," Elna said. "I found them in the old wing 3 weeks ago, catalogued and witnessed, after the records claimed they'd already left the country." She lifted her chin toward the dowager. "And the piece missing from this box is the one pinned to Her Majesty's coat right now." Every phone in that terminal was up, every single one. I could see the little black rectangles pointed at us from every angle, a wall of witnesses, and I knew right then that whatever happened to me next, it was already too late for them to make this disappear. It was out. It was in the open air. 100 strangers had heard it. Voss lunged for the box. And a man's voice, young, sharp, used to being obeyed, cut across the whole terminal. "Voss, stop where you are." I turned, we all turned. Standing in the lounge doorway, in a plain dark coat, entirely alone, was the king. King Alaric, 26 years old. Nobody had told him he was supposed to be there. Nobody had put it on a schedule. But it turned out that Elna Rask had done one more thing I didn't know about the night before. Unable to reach him through any palace channel, she had written him a letter, an actual letter on paper, and paid a courier to put it directly into the hands of the one servant she still trusted, a woman who'd worked the king's own floor for 30 years. And that woman had put it under his door. He'd read it, and he'd come. Alone. Off schedule. Because when you're 26 and drowning in advisors who all tell you the same comfortable thing, sometimes the only voice you'll finally trust is the one that had nothing to gain by writing to you. He walked down the honor line, past the guards, past Voss, who had gone very pale and very quiet. He stopped in front of his mother. "Take off the brooch," he said. Alaric, her voice changed completely, softer now, wounded, a mother's voice. "Darling, you don't understand what's happening here. These people." "I read the archivist's letter," he said. "I read the transfer orders. I sat up all night with them. I understand exactly what's happening." His voice didn't rise. That was the worst part, I think, for her. He didn't shout. He sounded tired and terribly young and completely certain. Grandmother made a promise to this country from that balcony. It became law. You were going to break it and fly it out in your own coat pocket. He held out his hand. Take off the brooch, Mother, please. The whole terminal held its breath again. And slowly, very slowly, with hands that had begun to tremble in a way I don't think she could stop, the Dowager Margaret reached up, unpinned the frost flower brooch from her gray coat, and placed it in her son's open palm. I wish I could tell you she was led away in handcuffs. That's how people want these stories to end. It's not what happened. What happened was quieter and in some ways sadder. There was no dramatic arrest in that terminal. The king closed his hand around the brooch and simply said, "The flight is canceled." Then he turned to the customs official who'd been waiting to wave her through and said, "Nothing leaves this country today. Nothing." And the man nodded so fast I thought his head might come loose. Margaret was escorted gently by the king's own hand on her arm back through the lounge doors and away from the cameras. Whatever happened after that happened behind palace walls, the way those things do. Months later, there was a quiet announcement that the Dowager Queen was retiring from all public life to a residence in the north for reasons of health. Everyone understood what it meant. Nobody said it out loud. Small countries protect their own even when their own have failed them. Maybe that's a flaw. Maybe it's a mercy. I've never decided. The heirlooms went back into the trust. All of them. The frost flower brooch, the ring, the circlet, every piece Elna had spent 3 weeks tracking down through falsified paperwork. They were recatalogued, rewitnessed, and returned to the vault where Sabine's promise had always meant them to stay, waiting, quietly for the worst day, so that if it ever came, no one would be left with nothing. And me. I thought I was finished. I really did. I'd broken formation, spoken out of turn, defied a direct order from a deputy chamberlain, and stepped into the path of the second most powerful person in the kingdom. By every rule I'd lived by for 11 years, I should have been stripped of the uniform that same afternoon. Instead, a week later, I was summoned to the East Garden. The king was walking there alone, the way I'd told Elna he did. His grandmother's habit. He saw me and waved off the aide who'd brought me, and for a while we just walked together in the cold, not saying anything. Two people who'd both broken protocol to do the right thing, not quite sure how to talk to each other about it. Finally he said, "You knew what it would cost you when you stepped out of the line." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And you did it anyway." "Yes." He was quiet for a few steps. "Voss told me you were furniture," he said. That's the word he used when I asked about the guards on the detail. He said, "They're just furniture, sire, scenery, they don't see anything." He almost smiled. He was wrong about that. "We see everything, Your Majesty," I said. "That's the whole job, we just don't usually say." He stopped walking and looked at me for a long moment. "Then thank you," he said, "for saying." I still serve in the ceremonial guard of Aldermere. 12 years now. They didn't take the uniform. If anything, they polished it. There's a version of the story schoolchildren learn now, though it's grown taller and cleaner in the telling, the way all such stories do. Elna retired the following spring on her own terms with the send-off she'd earned. We still meet at the bakery by the river sometimes. She still loses her glasses on top of her own head. And every so often, on my day off, in plain clothes, I go back to the portrait gallery and stand in front of Queen Sabine. She's wearing the heirlooms in it, the frost flower brooch, the circlet, and that steady, warm look the painter caught, the one that isn't quite a smile. Sometimes there's a school group there. Sometimes a little kid in a bright cap puts up a hand and asks the same question they always ask. Are they still there, the jewels? And now when the teacher says yes, they're kept safe, for all of us she's telling the truth. That's the thing I think about most. Not the airport, not the cameras, not even the moment she took off the brooch and handed it to her son. It's that a promise is only as real as the people willing to stand in the way of anyone who'd break it. Sabine made the promise, but someone had to keep it. And it turned out that someone was a man everybody had agreed to call furniture, a uniform in a lined scenery, a thing that stands still and sees everything and is never, ever supposed to say a word. I said the word. I'd say it again.